Hi there, Mary Elizabeth Parker here, and I'm here to give you another Random Facts Friday! So since today is June 9th when I'm recording this, I thought I would choose the emperor known as Nero. There is a reason that I chose him, and that's because in the year of 68 AD, on June 9th, that was the date that he died. So, he was born Lucius Domitius Ahenbarbus, and he was born December 15th in the year of 37. He was the nephew of the Emperor Caligula. I don't know if any of you know who that is, but he's also infamous for being a little bit of a baddie and a little sex crazy, quite frankly. So the father of Nero was named Domitius, and he died in 40 AD of edema. And then Agrippina poisoned her second husband, then married her uncle, Emperor Claudius, in 49 AD. And Agrippina, also known as Agrippina the Younger, had been exiled previously after attempting to kill her brother Caligula in 39 AD. And then she was allowed to return by Claudius after Caligula was murdered by someone else in January of 41. Might explain where we have some of these interesting behaviors from, such as a child, he apparently liked to put on a disguise and then kill people who argued with him. He liked to engage in the games at the Colosseum by dressing up in animal skins and attacking people bound to stakes there, and specifically he liked to bite off their genitals. A particularly disturbing punishment he enacted on a serial killer whose name was Locusta, was he trained a giraffe to have sex with her, and when done with this, he tossed her body to wild animals to be torn apart. At 14 years old, he was proclaimed to be an adult, and at 16 years old, he married Claudia Octavia, his father's daughter, his stepfather, Claudius, not his actual father, so his stepsister from his father's earlier marriage. Overall, Nero had 3 wives. First was Claudia Octavia, his stepsister. He divorced her for a baroness and then married his mistress Poppaea Sabina instead of the baroness. Together with his second wife, they had a daughter who they named Claudia Augusta, but allegedly he killed Poppaea Sabina while she was pregnant with their second child. And then his third wife, Statilia Messalina, actually survived Nero, so she actually lived longer than he did. I also found a report where he had castrated a man and married him at one point. I don't know when I was making my note cards where I had seen that, but kind of an interesting one if that's the case. Something interesting on a more positive note, in most people's opinions, was that he was actually tutored by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. And Seneca went on to become one of his advisors when he did become emperor. Around 16 or 17 years old is when he became emperor. And he was responsible for the deaths of many of his most intimate acquaintances, including his mother, his first and likely his second wife, his tutor and trusted advisor Seneca, whom he ordered to commit suicide, and Seneca complied like a good Stoic. Yeah. Kind of don't know if you want to be friends with him or not, right? He loved Greek culture. He was passionate about Greek culture, and Greece had been under rule for 2 centuries, and Nero visited Greece and participated in stage plays, musical performances, and athletic competitions. He did give them their freedom, which meant a tax exemption, not all bad. He competed in the 67 AD Olympic Games and won events in chariot racing, singing, and acting. Possibly or probably by bribing the judges. The Greeks loved Nero. Yeah. They actually delayed the Olympics by a year so Nero could compete in the year of 67. So they made adjustments so he could compete. And one of the reasons why he is also known to have likely bribed the judges or had some kind of manipulation of the judges is, for one thing, he won the chariot race where he fell out of the chariot and did not finish, yet he still won. I don't know how that happened. Maybe it was because he bribed them, maybe because it's speculated that it was granted because he was the ruler of Greeks and he was known for his sadism, even though the term sadism did not exist yet. In fact, the person that the word was taken for wasn't born yet. That might be another video for another time. If you're curious, the word sadism actually comes from the name of an author and famous libertine named Marquis de Sade. His name was turned into sadism later on. Just a little side random Fun Fact Friday. Ooh, that might be the new title for us, Fun Fact Friday. Anyway, I'm not sure on this one which one is the correct because there's a slight difference between the two accounts. One of the accounts I found was that when he became emperor at 17 years old, he changed his name to Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, because chances are it was a hard G back then instead of Germanicus. But then it said, on another account, when he was adopted by Claudius, his stepfather, that's when his name changed to Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. So I don't know which of those two accounts is more accurate. I didn't see anything to imply which way it was. We know he went by Nero. That's the most important part. We know he went by Nero. So Agrippina, his mother, murdered the previous emperor and tried to use Nero as a pawn, and then later he had his mother killed to maintain power. The first 5 years of his reign was mild. He reduced taxes, he gave Senate additional authority, and banned capital punishment. This changed when he started to quarrel with his mother, and there are many who believe that his mother, Seneca, and some of his other advisors at that point were actually the calming factor that kept him more benevolent, so to speak, towards his subjects, but that definitely changed. Now, many of you know the rumor about the Great Fire of Rome. For those who don't, there's a saying that Nero played the violin while Rome burned. We're going to get to that. But no one knows how the fire first started. Many Romans at the time believed that it was Nero who had started it. It likely started in shops that contained flammable merchandise and was probably an accident rather than any one person's intentional arson. So according to Tacitus, the fire lasted for 6 days and decimated Rome, with only 4 districts untouched out of the 14 in total. 10 of the 11 districts that burned were heavily damaged, with 3 of these completely destroyed. The fire may not have been that great. There's only one Roman historian during that period to mention it at all, and only briefly he referenced it in passing, and that was Pliny the Elder. The other first-hand account was from Seneca the Younger, so not to be confused with the tutor, to Paul the Apostle. And he explicitly stated only 4 blocks of insulae were burned, insulae being a type of apartment building at that time, along with 132 private houses damaged, which was about 7% of the private houses and 0.009% of the inoculae. Nowhere close to as widespread as Tacitus later claimed, though Seneca did say the fire did last 6 days, just like Tacitus did. So at least we know it lasted that long. We just don't know really how much damage was really done. Which side do we believe? And Tacitus told of a rumor that spread among the masses. While the flames surged through the city, Nero stood on his private stage and sang about the destruction of Troy in a comparison of the two events. Tacitus claims this was a rumor. Suetonius wrote with conviction that this was true. So that's probably the origins of the playing the fiddle while Rome burned, was that he was known to love music and performances and the arts, and he was not actually in Rome when it first happened, which we'll get to more. So he did not fiddle. In fact, the viol, which is the class of instrument that violins and fiddle, also known as fiddles, comes from, it wasn't developed until at least the 11th century, and violins aren't known to have existed really and being played until about the 16th century, I believe is what I've seen. So obviously he couldn't play the violin. He may have played another stringed instrument would have been possible, such as a lyre or a cithara, because those did exist. The lyre goes all the way back to Mesopotamia. Reports actually place him 35 miles away in his villa at Antium when the fire started. And when he heard about the fire, he immediately returned in order to begin relief efforts. Some of these relief efforts were things like he opened his own gardens to provide a temporary home for those who were now homeless because their homes were destroyed, ordered the construction of emergency accommodation and cut the price of corn, and he provided food directly so that people could eat. This doesn't sound like somebody who's entirely evil, unless he's using this just as a power to keep the people so he has power, because a ruler of no one is what? Has no power, right? But we don't know what his intentions were at this time. And he paid for much of these relief efforts out of his own pocket. So he didn't rely on other funds to come in to help him. He paid for a lot of it with his own money. Now, Nero needed a scapegoat because we had some Romans who were claiming he started the fire, so he blamed the Christians. Yeah. And, like I said, he needed a scapegoat. There were only a small number of Christians in Rome, and they were considered a strange religious sect and were an easy target. So at that point, they were just a small cult by the standards of that time. They were not nearly as widespread as they are today. Very far from it. So, now to June 9th. So on June 9th, 68 AD, Nero died at 30 years old. He died from assisted suicide while trying to escape the city of Nymphidus, and he was unable to carry out the deed himself, so his secretary, Epaphroditos, I'm sorry if I'm murdering these names, assisted him by stabbing him in the neck. As he died, he is said to exclaim, "What an artist dies in me." I'm assuming that's because he was into acting and performing as well as being an emperor. And he was the last of the Julio-Claudian emperors. So after that, no more Julio-Claudian emperors. So after gaining a bad reputation, lack of money, and high taxes ultimately, that cost him the empire and his life. After the Praetorian Guard abandoned him, that's when he committed suicide. And even his death, in death, he was still quite popular with many Romans. It was just some Romans that were not supporting him anymore. So there were a lot of Romans that still were pro-Nero, apparently. Now, there's another legend about Nero that I think is really interesting, part of the reason why I also wanted to share about Nero. So legend had it that Nero would return from the dead as the Antichrist. The revolt against Nero sparked a series of civil wars, which for a time threatened the survival of the Roman Empire. Nero was followed by Galba, the first emperor in the chaotic year of the four. So there were 4 different emperors the year after Nero died. That does sound pretty chaotic for a country, in my opinion. And then the Julio-Claudian dynasty that he was the last member of had ruled since its formation in 27 BC under Augustus. Such was fear of his persecutions that there was a legend for hundreds of years among Christians that Nero was not dead and would somehow return as the Antichrist. Now here's why it's interesting, to me at least. In ancient Greek and Hebrew, letters also represented numerals, as in Latin. Their values assigned according to the order of the alphabet. Alpha and Elf, for example, sorry, my Hebrew's not very cultivated, having the numerical value of 1. If the Greek spelling of Nero Caesar is translated into Hebrew, the numerical equivalent is 666. I'm sure many of you know that that is considered the number of the beast. In books of symbology, the number 6 on its own is considered a fortunate number, actually, for some of the books I have on symbology. So it always made me wonder, how is it 3 6s is bad? This may explain it, is that it was used to represent his name. So there was let me just see here. I mixed up cards, I'm sorry. So Irenaeus is the first church father to comment on the number of the beast, although he did not know what the number actually encoded. But for Irenaeus, the name of the beast, quote, possesses the number 666, since he sums up in his own person all the commixture of wickedness which took place previous to the deluge, and also sums up every error of devised idols since the flood. I think that's a fair argument to connect the connection between taking the name of Nero and turning it into numbers, being 666, and the belief that 666 is the Antichrist and the beast and everything. It's pretty interesting because he did persecute Christians. He used them as a scapegoat. I don't know if he just didn't understand them or what. But, yeah. So he had a few good things in there too, but yes, he did do a lot of not so nice things. But I hope that it was interesting anyway. So, feel free to comment below about what you think about this video or any upcoming videos you'd like to see. That it always helps people out when people do that. I'm not the only one who requests for ideas. And I hope everybody's having a great day and that you learned something new today that surprised you possibly. If not, I'm sorry, hopefully next time I'll do better. And I hope you have a great day, and thank you. Please be kind to each other.